dramatically changing. It's probably been on a steady incline the last few years, but really the last 6 to 9 months to a year has seen a completely different view that we haven't seen in a long time. So, there was a time when we were able to find candidates and just, post a job posting, whether it was on a customized site for a particular group, and just wade through the resumes, go through it. We all know that that has really been changing, and everything is dramatically different than it used to be. One of the key areas that we have started to see is really looking at, the jobs have changed. We all know that the market and the companies and the industries are constantly adjusting and developing, and that has really led to, of course, all the STEM field openings. The science, the technology, the engineering, and the mathematics. It's really staggering to think that over, 8 million of these workers are going to be in this space by 2018. And I think it's really also interesting. We talk about analytics being one of the hottest areas for recruiting talent and retaining talent, which is a combination of a lot of these different roles, right? The convergence of that. I'm sure all of you have those unique requisitions that you're trying to work and find in the STEM area, so you understand the challenges that come into play. The other areas are that, of course, job seekers have changed, right? We talk about millennials really like they're going to be changing jobs every 3 to 4 years. But at the same time, there's also just the whole way in which that folks are connecting with each other is dramatically changing. I think of being able to have conversations with, folks in Generation X and Y, as even with our parents, it's dramatically different with regards to how, job seekers are wanting to look at careers and wanting to be able to move things forward. So, Danielle, would you mind popping to the next slide? There you go. Thank you. So you guys know that there's a part also with technology, right? Mobile is very much powering job seekers. There's all kinds of statistics with regards to how much time we all spend on our mobile devices versus computers now anyhow, but it's also really powering job seekers. It's a little bit staggering to think that when folks are looking for a job, they do 40% of that is actually in bed, right? Welcome to iPads, and we're hanging out. And then all, of course, at restaurants, at work, even in the restroom, which is always kind of a fun statistic. So mobile is becoming a very big part, and of course that connection with SaaS platforms. It's really having to have an array of recruiting tools that really can meet the channels and the methods with which your job seekers are wanting to engage with companies is becoming pretty important as well. We'll go ahead and move on to the next one. Dan Finnegan, who is my boss over here and CEO at Jobvite. He is very much this is kind of a quote that he talks about that, folks working in this space are really having to cast a much wider net using lots of different channels and really having a different platform that enables to help them showcase their brand, right? It's about attracting that talent into something. Of course, at the same time, that means that things are really changing for the job of recruiters, right? The tools that we want to use, the methods, the channels, the constant communication, the constant candidate engagement has really been changing for you guys for your job. It's definitely different than when I started, 15, 18 years ago as a full-time recruiter, but you guys understand what that's like. Molly, I think one of the things, you have a lot of, customers and you partner with a lot of those folks. What are some you kind of seen in the market, in addition to a couple of things we've talked about?
Yeah, and thanks for that, Rachel, and folks on the phone. Similarly to Rachel, just thanks for your time today, and certainly happy to be a part of this conversation. On the piece specifically around casting a wider net, I think you're truly spot on with what we're seeing across our clients here at Glassdoor and in terms of best practices right now in the market. Ultimately, employers are being more creative than ever. They're being forced to be more creative than ever in order to get in front of highly sought-after candidates in what truly is a war on talent. What are the best practices that we're seeing from our employer clients are those who are empowering every single one of their employees to also think like recruiters and really extensions of the recruiting department within the company. Because what that's going to allow is, your best people can become brand ambassadors for you. We're going to talk through kind of as we go through the webinar today of specific ways that can happen, of course, utilizing social media and empowering your employees to get involved. But that's really one of the ways that I think people are just thinking really differently about recruiting within an organization, and it doesn't stop at the people who are solely sitting in that department. So with that, I think we're going to go ahead and get started. And Rachel, I'll pass it back to you to take us through the first deadly sin of recruiting.
That's great. Molly, I love your call on that. Back in the day, we used to joke as recruiters that you were always recruiting, whether it was the shopping market or the train or the airport, but that's just really transferred now to all the different social medias. In the sense of people that are recruiting. And it's not just recruiters who are doing it full time, it's a lot of the leaders in the company and employees because they become those advocates for where they're at and they want to bring other great people to come and work with them every day. So we'll jump right in. Deadly sin number one, I usually just find them and forget them. As we all know that's definitely not something that is working for us much anymore. On our next slide, you'll see that really 66% of social media users expect a response within a day. And that is just pretty staggering in the sense those are the initial expectations. So if you're wanting to create a candidate experience of a wow, you've got to be faster than a day. You've got to be different than just a standard response. And so that just tells you that the expectations that these candidates are having about a great candidate experience is dramatically changing. Of course, we also go into what we call nurturing your candidates. It really is no longer about, hey, I have a requisition and I've got to get a hire for that specific requisition. Companies are really looking at how do they manage their talent overall, their life cycle within the company. But that really starts to look at candidate cultivation and that relationship. It starts much earlier. It's a continuous engagement. Tracking those applicants to really determine kind of when and how's the best way to continue to engage with them. I know I personally was in a job search fairly recently, and one of the folks I spoke to had actually been in the works for almost 5 years with a particular company, and she eventually became their CFO for the company. But it was a 5-year relationship that she had with them until she made that transition. That one's probably a little bit longer, but at the same time, you do start to see that happen, and really trying to figure out how do you best engage these candidates. Which is not just about the recruiter, it's also the hiring managers, it's executives in the company, it's materials and information that you can be leveraging to really ensure that they have that great experience. We have, next we have a quote from actually one of our folks really talking about the ETFs. And back in the day, people were like, hey, I just used a couple of key job boards and things would work, but really it's one of the biggest mistakes that folks can make now because they're missing out on such a large pool of candidates and such a different folks to be able to engage with. And really, one of the things that we really encourage folks, of course, is really looking at a robust employee referral program and having a system in place that enables you to really connect that all together, both to be collecting information, but managing those top candidates for a particular industry and where you're focusing for your company can make a huge difference. We'll go ahead and pop into deadly sin number 2. I love this question. It's actually something that's part of what I'm working even today as I've joined Jobvite. I'm supposed to track that? And so we really talk about tracking your candidates, really being able to, look back and say, hey, we've had some fantastic hires in one of our organizations here in Jobvite, and so I'm able to ask the question of, like, well, how did we find them? What did we do to make that work so that we can duplicate that again for some key areas where we want to continue to be doing that work. There's also really something about, having constant communication with your candidates as part of that tracking, but there's also being able to have reports, right? I know you guys probably get asked of this constantly by either your leaders or your hiring managers of like, well, where are we at with that? And being able to let me show you all the things we've been doing, the different channels, the different outreach can really make a difference for those kind of real-time analytics to assess an area. I do love this next slide. It actually kind of makes me happy. It really will. I know it's one of those things that probably I wasn't the best recruiter early in my career about tracking things until I really understood how it could actually make my life easier. And I would say make my bosses happier too, being able to look at the return on the investment for things. One of the most important things is we all know we have limited budgets and we have limited time in order to get the best outcome for what we're trying to do. And so being able to really figure out where are you able to get your best candidates, where are you able to have the best experiences, and sometimes doubling down your funds in that arena or taking it away from areas where it's not actually helping or working from you can be fantastic. It also helps you at times not just in how you're spending your ROI from a marketing perspective, but also where you may have a challenging rec or you've got a challenging hiring manager to really dissect what have we tried, what's been working, what's not working, and what do we think about doing differently, I think is a big part of being able to track and dissect challenge spots as well. One of the things, Molly, you and I have been chatting and connecting as we've been thinking about this webinar. What are you seeing with your customers and your partners as it relates to tracking?
Yeah, and it's a really good question, Rachel. I think, like you, I am an especially big fan of this slide and just this topic. I think ultimately understanding, what channels are working for you all as an organization is critical in making smart business decisions. So what I'll say, it's really refreshing to see how many employers continue to become more demanding of analytics and reporting, both internally within their organizations, just asking for that additional support, and then, of course, externally with their partners for a deeper understanding of ROI. So the biggest thing that we continue to educate our clients around here at Glassdoor is the importance of looking at ROI through a variety of lenses. So, ultimately, you and your teams need to decide what metrics are the most important to you and your organization, but some data points that we're regularly talking about with our clients are kind of the standard ones, right? Time to fill, cost per applicant, cost per hire, and then you can go another level and talk about, okay, just total views and visits through different channels, trying to get a feel for the impact that you're having. But the other piece I'd add to that is when looking at ROI, it is also critical to understand soft ROI versus the hard ROI, which is usually kind of just the dollars and cents behind it. It's a tougher thing to measure, but with the right tracking, you can start to understand awareness, influence, and engagement to your ideal candidate audience, which again is going to really help you all make smart decisions. And in the cases where you need to realign budget or ask for more money internally, you can at least have a story to tell. So with that, we're going to move on to sin number 3, which is, okay, I have enough prospective candidates today, so why feed the funnel? I think a lot of this goes without saying, but ultimately we just cannot be caught flat-footed. We never know what our competitors are doing or what the future holds, and quite frankly, in my opinion, this is why recruiting is one of the hardest jobs out there, because we are relying on the ever unreliable end user to determine our success, and that's the behavior of human beings. So situations are going to change, and while you may believe you have found that absolute perfect candidate for a role and they are the perfect fit, the truth is that the future is uncertain, and we always have to be prepared for the unexpected. So it's critical to keep your candidates warm and engaged, even if you do not have a role for them in the immediate, because when you have unexpected attrition or when your internal business partners are requesting unforeseen hires, you have people ready to go. And this is also going to really help just create and further build that awareness for your organization in general. I think here, at Glassdoor internally, no matter what, whether or not we are hiring somebody, a candidate, we always want to ensure that their experience with us was exemplary, because the time may come where another role is going to open up, and we'd like to reach out again and see if the time is right at this point. So now the question becomes, how do you do that? Ultimately, we all know the best candidates are not looking, right? And how can you show prospective candidates what your company is all about? So, really, there's so many different channels where an employer can tell their story today. And I'm sure for those of you on the phone, sometimes it feels daunting, which channel actually matters and is pertinent, and where to spend your time and resources. The biggest thing to understand is, where do your candidates spend their time, right? And so when we're talking about that analytics and tracking piece, this goes back to the soft ROI of engagement and influence and awareness. You need to be talking to candidates on the avenues that they are investing and spending time. So the candidates who are not actively looking are the ones that are even more likely to do their research and due diligence when an opportunity is presented to them. In theory, they may be totally happy where they are today, and we all know that kind of creating that cold call experience into a warm lead is not easy. So it's important to understand how to get in front of these people and ensure that the messaging out there about your organization is in line with the story that you want to tell. So, we would say consider this option. You need to take proactive measures. Social media presence for recruiting is a no-brainer. I don't think this is news to anybody on this call. But it also is important to be meaningful. And when you're setting up these campaigns, be really targeted. Of course, every organization has evergreen roles where you may be able to take a widespread, more blanket approach on your outreach. And that's great for just general awareness. But when the time calls and the role is deserving of a little bit more scalpeled approach, you want to be really targeted and you want to understand the channels that exist that are going to deliver the candidates that you want. Another piece of this is just those employee referral programs. I mean, I think this is a theme throughout this entire webinar today is we cannot underestimate the power of your people. The employees who are already there today, get into their networks and let's empower them to help, create the future of your organization and determine who their coworkers are going to be. Let's take a look at social media and job searching. We know that nearly 2 in 3 employees say that their employer does not currently use social media to promote job openings, or even scarier, may not know how to. And, this is 2 in 3 out of every employee. And then in addition to that, 3 out of 4 say that their employer does not currently promote their employer brand on social media, or worse, doesn't know how to. And it's okay if this is your organization and you're not currently utilizing these channels. Even so, all the more reason that you're here today. But it's time to act. And what we're going to talk through is how to do that and what channels are the most compelling based on where candidates are spending their time. In terms of social media and job searching, again, we know that 79% of candidates are likely to use social media in their job search. 86% of people in their first 10 years of their career are using it. So going back to the previous point that, 66 to 75% of employees don't think their employers know how to do that, that's just a stat we can't ignore, and we've got to change. The reality is that every job seeker is on at least one social platform doing something, and it's critical that you have coverage in each channel and focus on the ones that are coming up high in search. You want to get the most out of the candidate traffic that organically exists today for your organization. Something that I'm going to challenge all of you on the phone to do if you have not done so already is Google your organization with some keywords related to recruiting. Company name, jobs, what it's like to work at your company name, are employees happy at company name? If you've not done this exercise, please do so, because it's a great place to start in order to understand where a job seeker is organically going to be driven when they are doing research on you. And ultimately, we have to complete that cycle of what is the experience when they get there and what is the messaging that they see. For those of you who want to take this kind of to the next step, Glassdoor did just launch company updates. And unlike some other status updates that you may be familiar with, these are tailored to the people specifically doing homework about your organization and deciding whether or not to work for you. So we would always recommend, as a best practice, highlighting news and changes in your workforce, adding a new video. It can make all the difference, and ultimately it is just showing a level of engagement and activity in social media that the job seekers want to see. None of these icons should be new or unfamiliar to any of you. Ultimately, these are just the major social platforms that we're constantly recommending employers to be involved in. When you're talking about social media, I think within organizations, we still hear a lot of companies view social media as marketing or PR or communications. And while of course that is true, it is also just a critical part of a recruitment strategy. So if you all are not engaged in taking ownership of the social media platforms you see here, that is a very great takeaway from today's webinar. Something else I want to make sure you all leave with today is just an awareness that Glassdoor does offer many free ebooks one of which is entitled 50 HR and Recruiting Stats That Make You Think. So there's a great chapter on this book that I kind of want to touch on really quickly here, and it's really discussing the experts on hashtag hijacking and how do you get in front of audiences that you're not currently reaching today. So on this slide, you can kind of see what an example of that would look like, and I'll talk you through it now. If you're a smaller brand, growing that follower base and thinking of ways to increase your traffic, following what other brands are doing, it's immensely helpful. I know that I personally try to reach out to others in my area of expertise to set up meetings and see what we can learn from one another. So really engaging in your personal, professional network, learning best practices, this is going to help. We did also just post the top followed companies on Glassdoor, so this is a really great way for you to identify the brands that are currently doing this very well today and where you may be able to get some best practices. So no surprise, you know, the company that I can use an example that's doing this incredibly well is Twitter. And, you know, they have the hashtag join the flock. And what they're doing is they're encouraging their employees to post using it. They're just reinforcing that mantra of brand ambassadors, and anytime anything is going on related to their employer brand or that can impact their candidate experience, they're using that hashtag. So kind of to close out this in, I want to leave you all with this, what feels like kind of a win in terms of production here for social media. Employers who used social media to hire found a 49% in improvement in candidate quality over candidates sourced only through the traditional recruiting channels. So the one thing that I would encourage all of you to do is really embrace social media. I know sometimes it feels scary, it feels exposing, it feels like you know, there's so much information out there, it can be daunting. But ultimately, the more informed your candidates are about what it's really like to work at your organization, what the job really entails, the more likely that you're going to hire the right fit. And the right fit who's going to be happier, who's going to stay longer, and be a more productive member of your team. Okay, so moving along, let's go to sin number 4. Who needs PR? Our employment brand is fine. Oh man, that just kind of hurts my heart, because I think employment brand, while it is a relatively new term in the recruitment space, it's really the foundation of everything else that you do. What your company is known for, what it is like to work there, and what the perception is of what it is like to work there. It matters so much to the work that all of you are doing day in and day out. You know, you're sourcing, you're tapping candidates on the shoulder, you're casting this wide net, and your employer brand needs to be alive and well in order for all of that hard work to come to fruition and to be worth it. So we would say consider this option. Look at your employment branding across the board, right? And again, we're going to talk about social media, but it's just such an important piece of this being a successful strategy. Let's look at your active social media pages. What is the message that is being told there? And is it truly indicative of what it is like to be a member of your organization? I think this is something, you know, when Rachel kicked us off on the different market that exists today, this probably feels a little bit scary to those of you who've been in the space for a while, but something we talk about is allowing employees to bring their whole self to work, right? And part of that is really embracing your employer brand for what it truly is. You know, it's flawed, as are candidates, but ultimately you want to make sure that the people that you are attracting are the right fit for your employer brand and what it truly is. You definitely want to incorporate your employees' voices. You know, candidates want to hear from the people who are doing the job today and who are living that life as it truly exists. You know, there's no surprise that an employer is going to tell you great things about a position, or, you know, even those of you on the phone as recruiters, you of course are going to sell the dream for what your company is about. But let your employees get involved and let them really share the experience from their perspective, because candidates embrace that and they're going to appreciate that level of transparency. Lastly, let's talk about branding your career site. I think that the idea of a career site has really transformed also in the last 5 years, and a lot of this has to do with social media and kind of this awareness around transparency and employer brand that otherwise may have not existed. But you really have to think of your career site as an extension of your employee base. And we should have videos and testimonials and feedback from your employees as to what it's really like to work there. I can give you kind of a personal example here again for what we do at Glassdoor. Speaking of the phrase brand ambassadors, which I think has been said many times today, it's just as important that your employees know what you stand for, what your employer brand represents, and that they are proud to be a part of it and they want to help spread the message. So employee referral programs, they continue to be an integral and valuable component of a company's recruiting strategy, and those are ultimately going to serve to reinforce the employer brand. The one thing that I want to say, and I think I'd be remiss if I didn't mention it, some of you on the phone are probably thinking, well, I don't even think we have an employer brand, or I don't know if we do have an employer brand, if we like it, and if we want to change it. And I get that. And the one thing I will say is an employer brand is a work in progress, as are candidates and as are many companies. It's not a set it and forget it strategy. It is ongoing. It takes getting feedback from your employees internally. It really is, it's a strategy that's going to have long-term benefits. So if you don't have an employer brand today, or if you feel like it needs improving, that's okay. You just have to start somewhere. So there are really 5 ways to develop brand ambassadors, and I can talk through all these, and I'm also going to turn to Rachel, who brings a ton of knowledge here, and see if she has any feedback. But ultimately, you want to encourage your team, you want to encourage them to get involved, you want to reiterate the importance of their voice and their opinions. You want to communicate the importance of the employer brand and why your employees getting out and being ambassadors, how it's going to help improve just everything around working at your organization. You want to incentivize them, you want to train them, and you want to make it easy. I can give you a quick example of VMware, who runs social campaigns at their organization to encourage employees to share what it is like to work there. I know that may feel scary or uncomfortable for some of you, and you're not quite there, but I mean, that's absolutely a best practice as this is evolving for you. For VMware, their corporate crush campaign encouraged every single one of their employees to post with the hashtag #ILoveVMware in order to share the great things that they loved about working there. And they also did an Architects of What's Next campaign and gave office mugs with inspiring quotes that employees could then post to tell their story. I think, ultimately people don't want to see the stock photos. They want the real stories and videos from people who are actually working at your company. So Rachel, I just want to turn to you and see, do you have any thoughts or feedback on, developing brand ambassadors internally?
Yeah, I think one of the most important things as you think about the brand is the reality is the world is becoming so connected that people are going to figure out what it's like to be at your company anyhow before they join. And so just enable that, make it easy for them to have access and to see what it's really like. The other part, I think, of making it easy is also about the fact that, engaging your employees. It's fantastic. Most employees are really excited about where they work and what they do, and they want to share that, and they want to be able to reach out. And sometimes they're shocked at how large their network really is, from everything from teachers to where their kids go and their neighbors and previous jobs and coaches, that there really is a pretty wide network, that it's amazing the 2 to 3 degrees of separation to be able to expand that can be really heavily utilized. But at the same time, there's got to be something to make it really easy. And so if we think about how fast it is, and particularly some of the tools that are out there, of just being able to self-select. I know one of the things that I love to be able to do is to be like, I do have a pretty broad network. I have worked in HR, I've worked in recruiting, I've not worked in HR. My network is kind of varied. And being able to customize, hey, we have a particular opening, whether it's on my team or it's in G&A or it's, a head of marketing for a friend of mine who's the head of HR at another company. Being able to customize that sometimes I really value, because it allows me to not kind of feel like I'm over kind of blasting my colleagues in the networks that I have. So there is something about making it easy and allowing them to kind of have control and customization that I think can be really helpful for companies in trying to leverage their brand.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's spot on. And actually with that, a question came in that I do want to address. So someone on the line said, how would you recommend getting employees involved with voicing their opinion about our company, our culture, and the jobs if in the past they have not shown interest in doing so? And I mean, that's a fantastic question. Ultimately, what's in it for me is usually kind of the approach that people take, as much as we'd love that for not to be the case. So one recommendation that I would make is empowering your employees by having a kind of a peer-selected council. So what I mean by that, and this is something we've done at Glassdoor, we want people to know that they are impacting the direction of the company. And because we want it to feel important and like it matters, we've taken the opportunity to have peers kind of vote for the peers that they would want to be involved in company decisions, organizational-wide decisions, and this could be a great example of that. So you can envision sending out a note to all of your employees, hey, we are trying to identify, your peers who you think would be a great representation of you and the team and the direction that you want. And in doing so, you can identify the people that would basically be pulled together and have this presented to them. So being selected by your peers means that we need your help, and we would love ideas on how to get your coworkers and brand ambassadors and involved in telling our story. You would be amazed at how empowering that is, and when all of a sudden the ask comes from their peers versus their leaders or their executive team, it takes flight. It truly does. And there are a number of different ways to do this, but I think for the sake of this question and today, empower it to come from your employees and not necessarily leadership. So we're going to kind of wrap up this in, but the last thing that I would say here is it's critical to let your employees be who they are. Encourage viral photos and videos in all departments. Show the real you on your career blog or through social posts. I mean, ultimately, candidates want to work with real human beings, and that's why we say do away with stock photos. Let people show who they really are. And it's going to let the candidates really understand that you embrace transparency. So just kind of driving the point home, employee referrals are the #1 source for quality new hires, and referral candidates are 5 times more likely to get hired than other candidates. Do not underestimate the power of utilizing your people, make them brand ambassadors, and help them tell your story, because their voices are the ones that are going to be listened to.
Great, thank you, Molly. I think one of the things we want to be able to move forward is with our deficit number 5. This thing of sticking to the old. One of the things, if there's anything I learned in my career and the work that I've gotten the chance to do, is continuing to do the same thing over and over again just does not work. And so it almost leads to ultimate disaster, both for my own development as well as the coaching that I do with leaders and executives. It's so important to keep learning and to keep changing and to keep moving things forward. And so that's what this then really talks about. We're going to talk about kind of recruitment techniques and tools. I think there's some great questions we're getting from folks like, hey, I want to try to do this. How does this work? What are some advice and things like that? Definitely reaching out and trying to find new ways to do things is one of the most important, things for you guys to all be doing. And you're doing it now by just even attending this. And at the same time, be thoughtful about, it's not just always one thing that's going to work for you and your company. You might need to iterate and try it again and keep going at it. So on the next slide, we really talk about recruitment techniques and tools, right? And so, one of the things is you do want to start with something that really focuses on recruitment, like have that technology that be the centerfold. It's got to also have things that are very intuitive, and it's also usually got to plug into different places. And so these are just some things that you think about the criteria that you might think about utilizing in your techniques and your tools. Think of this in mind. as Molly's been talking so fantastically about the fact that the brand and the internal referrals and utilizing your employees, there's so much research that shows that not only does that give you the return on the investment from a resource perspective, but it also just is a great way to also show that these folks usually are lasting hires usually as well. So there's a compounding effect that starts to happen. I think some of you are asking some questions of how do we get this started, how do we get it going? And you've got an initial inertia to overcome, but once that starts to happen, you will see compounding effects happen for your both employee engagement, but the employment branding, but then also the recruitment efforts to bring folks on board. One of the things that I do encourage folks to think about, and this kind of goes into the best of breed versus a suite. When you are looking at kind of at a robust set of capabilities, sometimes the larger kind of HR suites have gotten so large that they don't necessarily meet the specialized needs of an area. And, recruiters definitely want to be able to use something that supports them with all their different channels, helps them be able to communicate effectively, as well as track all of those results. And so these kind of end up becoming important components. So really think about kind of, if you're looking at technologies and tools, that it starts with that recruitment role. Look at your users. Who's your heavy users, which are going to be your recruiting team, but then also think about your users from the rest of your employees as you start to engage them. The other thing to really think about that we encourage folks to take a look at is it intuitive, right? I talked earlier about you got to make it simple, right? Being able to have folks, sitting on the train, sending things along to folks can be a really fantastic way to engage with them. And so think about, technology that supports, our lives and makes it really easy, and make sure that we are, putting things in place that make it straightforward, it's easy to flow, that user interface that makes it easy that can be really important. The other part is, of course, the integration. One of the things that we always talk about is that if you are looking at a suite of resources for your entire HR team, it's unlikely that you're going to have one that does everything. It's like saying there's one tool for a whole company. And so even within an HR function and a team that you're looking at, you want to have things that can integrate, and being able to have great APIs that can plug in for different things. The amount of things that we're going to keep adding and plugging into even the systems that we have here at Jobvite is just going to keep growing exponentially. And so that becomes an important, in addition to that intuitiveness, think about what things can be connecting to make that integration work really well too. So on that note, we'll move on to sin number 6. Executive buy-in. This is something that I think Molly and I are both passionate about. I've been passionate about it because I've sat in many of your seats as a recruiter, and I didn't always understand how the tracking of information was used and rolled up. But once I did and started to work as a staffing leader, it really helped me understand how do you justify budgets and dollars and work that your team is doing in service to the company. And so getting that executive buy-in is super important. And executives, as much as they may not know everything about what you do in the function of HR or even the function of recruitment, they really understand marketing and sales because they are business leaders first and foremost. And so that concept of really understanding the marketing and sales funnel is not that different than looking at a recruitment funnel. And so thinking about how you're using your resources and your dollars to manage that funnel and feed in the way that you need to have happen can be really important. And so having technology and tools that enable you for that support does matter in those arguments as you start to put together, business cases for looking for resources or looking for systems to be able to meet your growing needs. Molly, you've been really talking about, helping companies with their employment brands and their site. Is there other advice that you would share with folks as it relates to kind of executive buy-in?
Yeah, I think it's a really important question because I don't know that HR and recruiting necessarily falls on kind of the executive eyes as often as it should. And I say that because we hear it all the time for our clients. And I mean, being in that space, I naturally want to push back and say, there are no companies without recruiting and HR. We are responsible for finding the people that build the companies and that ultimately are responsible for the success of the entire strategy. So for me, it's a no-brainer, but of course, easier said than done. Something that I would recommend to all of you is lean on your partners, the organizations that you're partnering with and in your recruitment strategy, and ask them to arm you with best practice and data, because that's the stuff that the executives are really going to care about and want to pay attention to, right? So if we go back to tracking and analytics and understanding ROI and impact on the business, I mean, that's how you're going to get their attention. And your vendors have all of this information, not only for your organization, but industry trends and what we're seeing based on different verticals. So really rely on your partners, because they're going to talk to a plethora of companies, and they're going to be able to share things that even your executives, with all of the experience they may bring to the table, probably aren't thinking about in the day-to-day. And it's a win-win for you, because it's an opportunity to kind of showcase the work that you and your team are doing that's just critical to the success of the overall organization.
That's a great call out, Molly. I think one of the things that we often get when you work in a smaller company too, like I know many of you probably wear multiple hats, is you have an idea, you have something that could be improved, being able to leverage, well, what are others doing? What results are they seeing? Like use that information from an outside-in perspective, as well as your own internal information. Like leverage both of those as you think about looking at what's working really well or what's not potentially working so well, and being able to make improvements and getting that executive buy-in for making things change going forward. I will say, as an HR leader, executives do understand that sales and marketing funnel. They really do. And so it's really easy to translate that to kind of the recruitment funnel. There's two big important components when I think about how do you demonstrate the value from an executive perspective. And one of them, of course, it starts with regular reporting. It's being able to really talk about what are you doing that's feeding the top of that funnel from a candidate generation and cultivation perspective. We look at oftentimes, particularly when I was getting into it, we did a lot of work over multiple years around looking at our investment in college recruiting, college programs. And that was something that was a longer term, right? Because you're getting them as interns, you're having them be employees, you're looking at the retention 3 to 4 years out, their contribution as leaders. But you can also just look at things that are more short term. Like, hey, we really want to focus on a partnership with a particular specialized organization, and you can start to see engagement maybe immediately respond to, like, we got some candidates, right? And so being able to do that constant regular reporting really is important. I think for some folks, even in a small company I was in, it was important to even justify having my Glassdoor account. I remember a CFO was like, I was like, why are you going to ask me that question? But it was like, I had to have the reporting to go back and make the argument, since it was like my first day on the job, right? The other is around the bottom line impact, right? I really do believe in running HR like a business. I have a team, I have resources, I have goals we have to meet, I have a budget, and we're constantly looking at the bottom line impact that we make for the company in general, and being able to put things together like some of our customers have done that says their employee referral program saves them like $250,000 in agency fees. That's very tangible, going back to Molly's comment of kind of the hard and the soft numbers. They're also able to really track, like, hey, we were able to improve time to hire by like 4 weeks. So those are really significant, and I know that some of this can help with tools and technology, but there are those softer savings with regards to maybe candidate experience that's a little bit harder to track. You can also look at your employees in your own HR team as well as your employees in the company, like their return on that impact. And so think of those hard and soft impacts, both of them, and be able to kind of look at all of that too. So one of the things that we actually have in here is with regards to going to that employer branding component. Companies with a good employer brand see an average of 22% in reduction in recruiting costs. So we do have some articles that are referenced in this material that really talks about, wow, that's a great external number to start to use with your executives as you think about it. And companies with a strong employee brand enjoy a 50% cost per hire savings. That really can be significant, particularly if you're doing a significant ramp in your hiring in an area. I also love this next part. We talk about, employer brand, where it's poor versus it's strong. And, we all know that there are definitely times where if you live in a certain part of the country or a certain tech industry, we know the companies that are great to be with, and some that they're transforming their brand, right? Or they're making their brand more aware. And so this helps with, of course, everything from attraction of people, but also retention of talent. And looking at the higher, acceptance rate. It all hurts when you lose that candidate at the very last stage, right? Of course, we talked about the cost per hire, definitely the expansion of referrals, and all of those things can make a really big difference. So think of these as tying to the brand awareness as well as looking at your return on the investment in your staffing efforts. And I will say, good branding equals great hires. It really is. And you're able to attract people that maybe weren't looking or weren't thinking about you once they become aware of your company and what you're all about and what you're doing. And making it super easy for them to be able to see all of that in a really genuine way that comes from your employees can make a difference. And, Molly, I'm going to transition it back to you. Glassdoor has just been doing a ton of pioneering work in this space of helping companies kind of build and improve their brand. I know you've spoken about a bit of it previously, but is there anything in particular you would just really like to bring to the attention for folks in that connection?
Yeah, I think it's a really good point. And ultimately, guys, in order to understand how we can improve our employer brand, we have to know what's broken today. And in order to do that, you've got to ask for feedback, right? So that's feedback from both your employees and your candidates. If you have people declining offers, or if it's taking a long time to fill these roles, you need to be proactive in talking to your candidates. If this is a candidate who you were really excited about, who you thought you were going to be able to move forward with, and they say no, use them as a great resource for what could we have done better? What would have made you change your mind? Is there anything that had we gone back and done differently, this would have been a different outcome? You have to get uncomfortable and ask for that feedback in order to get better and ultimately improve. And, that's another piece about the referral programs, the poor referral programs. If you don't have employees right now who are excited to become brand ambassadors and tell your story and refer their friends, why? And those are questions you have to ask them, because if it's something to do with the culture or what working there is actually like today, that's a critical thing for you to know, especially as you all are, on the streets, if you will, trying to create awareness about what life is like to work there. You have to intimately know what is life like working there. And in order for you to improve it or change it, that's just feedback that you have to get. And once you feel like you know what your employer brand should be, again, lean on your partners, and they can share best practices and they can help you get that accomplished. It's certainly not a quick fix. Employer brand is ongoing. It takes a little bit of nurturing. The place to start is get feedback and be really, really honest with yourself of where are you potentially struggling, or where is there room to get better. So to wrap this up, the final sin of today is the belief of, if I build it, they will come. And, that is just a dangerous philosophy, because that kind of goes to that set it and forget it strategy that we keep saying is not what this is about. You can't just, have relationships with job boards and social media sites and get everything fired away and think, okay, I'm good. This is ongoing. It's constant. And there's a number of things that you can do to make sure your efforts are reiterated and being reinforced. So we would say engage your candidates, right? You need to ultimately deliver content that they can relate to. That's when having the feedback from your current employees is going to be critical. Really understand, what is a day in the life like for a software engineer, for a sales rep, for somebody on the legal team? What is a day in the life truly like? Create content around that, and then that is what you message to your ideal candidates. Very, very targeted, very strategic, and very real. Something that we haven't really chatted about a ton, and it's not to be overlooked, is what is your application experience like? And you all, as recruiters, we have to put ourselves in the candidate's shoes and be incredibly familiar with, what does that process look like? How painful is it? How easy is it? Where are we potentially creating roadblocks that are unnecessary and that we can break down? So what we would say is simplify the message, right? We've talked a lot about getting content out there, having the candidates get that real transparent look of what the role is going to be like, but keep it simple. You want to make it very, very digestible. Remember, these people are on their phones, they're on their tablets, they're mobile, they're on the go. What is something that they can take and really be high impact, but not overwhelming? The top 5 pieces of information that job seekers want employers to provide, this is what this is going to share. So as they search for work, the number one thing that a candidate wants to see are details on what makes the company an attractive place to work. Going back to employer brand, if you don't have the answer to that today, that's okay, but let's find it. And think beyond just benefits and compensation. Think about, work-life balance and going back to that feeling of bringing your whole self to work. Does your organization stand for that? Does your organization embrace that? And if not, why? And how can we change that? Of course, details on comp are going to be important. That's the number 2 thing. But what we know is if a candidate truly believes in your culture, in what you're all about, in the work they're going to be asked to do, compensation is not as big of a driving factor as you would otherwise believe it to be. They do want to know details on benefit packages, but again, there's so much more that goes into that. You just want to make sure the content is available and it's digestible. What is the company mission, the values, the vision, and just basic company information. They need to know where they're going every day. They need to know the basics. You'll see, though, the number 1 thing on this list is, why are you the company that I should go work for? When we're in this war of talent, there are a plethora of opportunities. Right now, we just don't have enough candidates. So kind of wrapping this up, what we would say is recruiting is really like marketing, and to capture the most candidates, you need to make it as easy as possible for them to apply. So similar to what I had shared earlier about Googling your company, searching your company, understand what is the experience for a job seeker as they're doing their research. Do the same thing from an application perspective. If you have not already tried to apply to one of your jobs from your phone, from your tablet, whether you have a native app, whether you have a you need to understand what that experience is for the candidate. And what we know is that shorter forms equal higher number of candidates applying. I know for some industries, you have to, from a compliance perspective, have usernames and passwords, and there's just certain things that you have to put the candidate through. I would say, and just stress, as much of that as you can break down or peel away from the process, do it. It's going to increase the likelihood that people who see your jobs are going to be able to apply to your jobs. And you'll see on the slide here, the screenshot that we have is from Jobvite, who is a phenomenal example of an ATS that does this really well and makes this experience for a candidate very, very seamless. So just something to think about, and always remember you have to walk in the shoes of the candidate and understand what is it like for them. So this is really kind of the last piece of the webinar, team, before we open it up to questions. If you have not already had an opportunity to enter your questions, now would be a good time to do so. There is one, though, that did come through that I just want to address right now, because it's also been on Twitter a couple of times. So you're asking, you talk a lot about social media. What do you think about recruiting on new platforms like Snapchat? It's an awesome question. Thank you for bringing it up. I think ultimately this is going back to that targeted campaigns piece, right? So certainly if this is a new grad kind of outreach that you're trying to get in front of, or people who are heavily using Snapchat, absolutely. Absolutely. Get the word out there and utilize it to attract those people. But know your market and know your end user. There are roles where it's going to make a ton of sense, and then there's ultimately roles that it's just not, based on the people who are using Snapchat. And that goes back to, again, putting the pressure on your vendors and your partners to arm you with that data. As you reach out to Snapchat, ask them, who are your users? Who's coming here? Where do they spend their time? How are other organizations utilizing this platform for success? I know at Glassdoor, it's something that we are constantly encouraging our clients to do. Come to us for thought leadership, for ideas around best practices and things we're seeing in the industry. And I know we're not the only vendor that has that mentality, so I really recommend you ask that of your other partners as well.
Wonderful. So at this time, we want to thank Molly and Rachel so much. We've got a ton of questions, so I'm just going to start to go through them. And just as a reminder, we will be sending out this presentation. I know a lot of you want to see either the recording or the presentation deck, so know that that will be sent to you. My first question is actually going to be for Rachel. Rachel, back when you were at the beginning of the presentation talking about tracking, a lot of people were curious to know what programs do you utilize and what methods did you utilize as a recruiter for tracking?
So for tracking, I guess you're spinning the question around, as an active recruiter, what are the ways that we were tracking everything we were kind of doing to see success for hiring?
Correct.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, so believe it or not, my first couple of years of Intuit, we actually didn't even have an HRIS system or actually an ATS system at all. It was amazing how large we were that we actually didn't even have anything. And so they did implement an initial system. I can't even remember what it was, to be candid. And that allowed us to at least be able to start the fundamentals. And mind you, this is 60 years ago, where we were at least being able to say, hey, I have a requisition. I've done some postings that was through our normal job site, but also we were connecting to other sites, and we were able to see exactly where we were getting responses from resumes initially. That started to progress later, of course, where we were doing much more outbound marketing and connections. So being able to target, we always go back to it's very similar to marketing. Where are your customers? Who are your customers? Who are you targeting? Where do they hang? Where do they play? Where do they play? What do they do in their free time? And we would then try to be customized in some of those initial efforts. I did mostly non-technical recruitment, and so what initially started as rec by rec, we then started to do bulk. Like we were looking at product marketing or marketing communications folks. And so then we would do batch, looking to, how do we generate interest in each of those major buckets in the kind of technical side of the camp. And so early days it was spreadsheets in some cases, and then we started to have a little bit more advancement in our ATS systems. The last few years I've actually been at smaller companies where a lot of the small companies have almost had nothing. And that's probably part of the reason I actually joined Jobvite. I just really much believed in the product and what they were doing to help, both small to medium and larger companies with this exact challenge and problem. And so, of course, here at Jobvite, we're able to track everything down to the detail, to the point that I'm actually elevating it to some executive views to be able to share with executives about how we're tracking a lot of this. So a little long-winded answer, but I hope it helps answer, things I did early as a recruiter, but then as I've been an HR leader, the things that we've looked at and we've used as well to be successful in that.
Great. This next question is for Molly. We got several questions about nonprofits or smaller businesses and how they take advantage of social media. This question specifically says, how would you suggest a nonprofit promote jobs on their social media site? There's a concern that they will be inundated with applications from passionate volunteers, but who may not be the best fit for a position.
I think that's a really, really good question. And we hear this all the time, right? Because then what good does it do if you all are just inundated with resumes, and it's going to create bandwidth issues for you internally, and that's no good for anybody. So I think this goes back to that message around employer brand. Because ultimately, yes, a nonprofit who stands for a great cause and who's doing wonderful things, that is awesome, but that's not necessarily what the employer brand of the organization is about. So remember, we have to let the candidates know what is a day in the life actually like, right? So maybe you are passionate about our purpose, and maybe you think we are doing amazing things, but are you ready, willing, or qualified to do A, B, and C, which are just a critical part of the job? And oftentimes we find the answer to that is no. So we would just recommend make sure your employer brand is telling that story, and it allows candidates to self-select themselves out of the process a little bit more. No job seeker wants to spend time completing resumes and sending in applications that ultimately they're not going to be a good fit for. So the more upfront and honest you can be about what the role actually entails versus what the organization represents, the better. I think that this specific question we can have a 30-minute dialogue on that alone. In terms of kind of best practices we are seeing, I think more is more here, being really, really honest and upfront about what the role actually is. You're going to see people less inclined to apply simply because of the passion that they have for the cause. That being said, you don't want to disrupt the passion that they have. So you can also call out, hey, still, love our company or want to support what we do, great. And we encourage you to do so through these avenues. Definitely a hard one though, and something that's just going to take a little bit of trial and error to understand what messaging resonates.
Wonderful. We're running out of time, so I have one last question for Rachel. If your question is not answered, feel free to reach out. We'd be more than happy to route your question to either Rachel or Molly if you want more information. This last question, Rachel, a lot of people were curious to know more about creating a successful employee referral program, and one person specifically asked what incentive would be a good idea for getting more referrals.
I think that's a great question. In fact, I know we are going to set up materials. In relation to an employee referral program, I would actually tie it back to one of the things we have in the slides, which is about the 5 ways to develop brand ambassadors, because that's the direct correlation, right? They're brand ambassadors that helps with an employee referral program. And so it talks about 5 major components, and one of these is the incentive. So encourage them, right? You have to encourage your employees to think about employee referral program. It goes back to some great questions that Molly was answering around why do people want to broadcast coming to work for their company or not, right? And get into that a little bit, but do encourage it. But, it has to be genuine and authentic. Communicating the importance, sometimes it just takes a little bit for folks to understand why is this important. Because it's tied with the brand of the company and as well as with our customers and our employees and attraction and retention. Sometimes just communicating the importance in a very simple kind of way with your employees can go a long way. Incentivize them. I know we have folks who are from different parts of the country and different industries. My very blanket answer on this is go see what's important to your employees. Go ask them. Go talk to, let's say you've got an extensive recruitment and you work in a nonprofit field. You may not have a lot of money, but how do you have that money stretch? Is to be able to talk to your employees and say what would matter to them. It may be something as fun as like a certificate to their favorite restaurant. Other folks are like just cold hard cash, right? Sometimes there's a new technology. I know when iPads first came out, that kind of became the thing that companies would use. To be like, hey, get your name thrown in a lottery for a new iPad. Well, now a lot of people have iPads, so that doesn't work as much, right? So go talk to your employees, particularly the ones that you think could be your big ambassadors and recruiting and attracting talent. What do they care about? Maybe they all want a day out at a team baseball game. Find out what they tell you. And then, of course, you got to train them and teach them, and then, of course, make it easy, which we've talked about. So I know it's not a blanket answer, but I think it's go talk to your customers, which are your employees, for your employee referral program.
Wonderful. That was a great answer. Well, thank you, everyone, for staying on the line. I know we ran over a little bit, but I so appreciate all the great questions. We've loved chatting with you. And, again, if you want to learn more information, please don't hesitate to reach out, and again, we'd be more than happy to connect you with either Molly or Rachel. The slide deck will be sent out again, and same with the recording. Thanks again, and have a great rest of your day.